Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about how we can use ambassadors to help grow our charity. My name is Lewis Clayton and I work for Hubbub Fundraising as a digital specialist. I've worked on a number of campaigns around the globe and super excited about ambassadors, a way that we can use them to help spread our message to a wider audience than before. I'm delighted to welcome John Valentine. John works for MQ Transforming Mental Health as the Senior Partnership Manager. John, do you want to tell us a little bit more about MQ and your role?
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, MQ Transforming Mental Health is the UK's first major mental health charity focused exclusively on the question of scientific research. I sit in the fundraising team at MQ, and like any of you who work for a small charity, on any given day I tend to wear a few different hats. So I do our corporate fundraising, our community fundraising, our challenge event fundraising, but also in what really brings me here today, I look after our volunteering programs as well, including our ambassadors program, which is our network of really switched on, really passionate, sort of grassroots level volunteers. So very excited to be here to talk a bit about the potential in those sorts of programs and how you build them.
Well, it's lovely to have you here. So today's webinar format is a question and answer session. So we're going to be asking questions on the following things. Firstly, what does ambassador mean to MQ? The type of resource we need to run this program, the impact that it's had on MQ, and then we'll look at the future as well. Because it's question and answer, we also want you to contribute to the questions, and we'll have 5 to 10 minutes at the end, and we'll pose those to John. So without further ado, let's begin. Now, John, one of the things I often hear is, what does an ambassador mean? And some of the viewers we have today work for small charities, big charities, some from universities. So I think we all have our own definition of what an ambassador is.
Sure.
So can you tell us what an ambassador means for MQ and what that kind of role looks like?
Yeah, sure. So for us, the ambassadors program is something that is really very flexible, and actually the common element between our ambassadors is really just that they buy into our mission statement, that they fundamentally believe that research can transform mental health. An ambassador can be almost anyone. It can be someone who helps to network the charity with corporate supporters. It can be someone who connects us to potential major donors. It can be someone who just helps us to review our messaging, and sort of ensures that we're being representative and that the language we use really feels right for what we're doing. As I said, the really critical element for us is just that kind of belief and that passion and that sense of wanting to do a little bit more, I think. Yeah.
And often, sometimes the first step is to actually just recognize an ambassador as a specific role within the organization.
Sure.
So you can see kind of who you're looking to kind of bring in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and we'll probably touch on this a little bit later, but, it's such an important thing to decide what is an ambassador, what do they do, and what do you really want from the program, and what can you give them as well?
Absolutely. Now, one of the things I'd like to just find a little bit more about is why you began an ambassador program in the first place. Now, anybody watching that wants to run an ambassador program is going to get questions from their colleagues. Why should we invest in this? What's the main drivers for doing this?
So for us, it comes really from a bit of a conflict at the organization's heart. So one of which is we're hugely ambitious. We're trying to become the UK's mental health research charity. Now, at the same time, we're a charity with roughly 20 staff. There's a slight incongruity there between those two things, and one of the solutions we've found to helping us get to that point is, well, why don't we look to activate and empower and enable the volunteers who kind of live in the same world as us? Why don't we give them the tools to go and do a lot of the heavy lifting, actually? Because we know that there are people out there who are desperately passionate about what we do, so switched on, and in many cases already activists in this space. So our job is actually a lot easier. We don't have to talk them through why our mission is important, why mental health is something that they should care about. All we really need to do is give them membership into a program that they can be really proud of, and the tools that they need to go off and sort of realize success with that. So for us as a small charity, the Ambassadors has always been a program that helps us sort of box clever rather than just work harder, because frankly none of us need to be working way harder than we do. And it exists to solve a sort of fundamental challenge of the business, which is, how do we get from A to B when A and B are quite far apart with only limited resource?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard you speak before about we have a certain amount of resource available centrally.
Mm-hmm.
How do we work smarter, and how do we make that kind of grow and scale that? And ambassadors is one of those reasons. But it's kind of like chicken and egg. So we want to use these ambassadors to help grow what we're doing, but it does require an initial investment.
Yeah.
And often when I'm talking to clients, the first question is, who's going to resource this? How much time does it take up front to invest into this to get to where we want to be? Can you tell us a little bit about how much time it takes you and your team to engage with your ambassadors?
Sure. I mean, if I can bring out a cliche, which I certainly didn't invent, volunteers are low cost, not no cost. We all know that. And there is a degree of, I think, initially time investment is the thing that comes first, which you are just going to need to form a baseline program. I think a really important thing, though, to say is that without giving it a fair shake, without giving that time to really engage with your initial ambassadors, to build a program in collaboration with them, which feels really good for the charity and the volunteers, I think is such a critical point, you're not going to give yourself any chance at all of success. So there is a degree of pain at the beginning, of really saying, look, we're going to commit to this, we're going to spend time with these individuals and really ensure that we've given them every chance to be valuable to the charity and to take that role and run with it. But you're never going to sidestep that question. There is always going to be a cost. And, you can iterate and build things in tiers. So at MQ, we've said, look, we're going to give this a go. We'll give it a fair shake. We're not necessarily going to spend a lot of money on it initially. And over time, if you begin to demonstrate success and you're seeing certain sorts of ambassadors really pulling great results out for you, then you refine your program, you really build it to focus on those individuals and empower them. And in time, that investment begins to justify itself, I think.
So what you're saying is they're obviously they're ambassadors and you identify them as having a big impact, so you invest more time into them, especially if resources is tight. And I guess in an ideal world, those ambassadors would be coming to us and saying, hey, how can we help? We have ideas, but often as people don't know how to engage with charities or not sure how the impact they could have. So they're not coming to us all the time. So how do you go about identifying those people and recruiting them and bringing them on board to your program?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways. I think first of all is building really meaningful relationships with your ambassadors. So taking the time to get to know them and not to just have superficial communication with them over a distance. You want to be where you can, sitting down with your ambassadors. You want to be, if you can't be in a room with them, speak to them on the phone. You don't want them to just be a group of people at the end of an email distribution list. You want to really get to know, what sort of capacity they have. Are they individuals who can potentially network you to major donors or to corporates or to trusts or whatever it might be? And those individuals are out there, and I think it's very easy to miss them if you're having a transactional conversation with your ambassadors, which is, we want you to do this, can you do it, yes or no? I suppose another piece is really spreading a bit of awareness around your organization. So do the other fundraisers, the other communications people in your charity know that there's an ambassadors program and know that that's a really meaningful way to engage with someone who wants to do more for the charity. Important also for your board, do they know high-level individuals that might really value a role like that? And often you'll have to tailor your ambassadors program so that someone who's a really, really high-level ambassador is maybe not recognized in exactly the same way as, let's say, a community ambassador. But having that awareness throughout the organization that this is a tool we can really use is so important. And again, there are things that you can do to ease the pressure on you centrally and to kind of outsource a little bit of that. So letting your ambassadors know what you're really looking for in other ambassadors, hugely important. Really empowering them to go off and find those people themselves. And that's not a free thing and it won't always work, but all those little tweaks, giving everyone the sort of fullest possible vision you can of the program is so important to making it work.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, looking at the kind of frustrations that you've seen along the way and maybe challenges, what are some of the biggest challenges you've had with your ambassador program, whether that's embedding it internally or actually with the ambassadors themselves? Or
yeah, I mean, embedding it internally is something that can prove challenging. Really getting other people in, not just your team, but teams beyond that to buy into it. as a source of value for the organization is not always the easiest thing, because ambassadors are not always working in the most obvious ways. Sometimes they're out there spreading awareness, kind of networking behind the scenes, actually. I think a really difficult thing comes with scaling it too. You start off having a very intimate relationship with your sort of first ambassadors, and you know them very well, and you have these great conversations. And then as you recruit more and more people, you face more and more time pressure. So you really have to start being critical and sort of picking your battles a little bit about, who do I really have time to go and meet and spend an hour with and have that kind of conversation, and who perhaps is important, yes, but not someone that I can really justify that time with. That can be really difficult, especially if you are using those relationship fundraising principles and trying to build those strong connections with all of your ambassadors. It can be difficult to kind of let go and to say, look, we can't necessarily afford to do this with everyone. We found, certainly being really transparent with ambassadors is important, to say we're a really small charity, we have very, very limited staff time, and we really want to do justice to the contribution you make by being as efficient and effective as we possibly can. So it's not without pain, and as wonderful as it is, there will be times where things are difficult. You may also find yourself having conversations with ambassadors that don't necessarily lead anywhere. There will be people, and there will be people who are very keen to help, who are passionate, enthusiastic, and you want to nurture that and really get those people involved where you can, but they won't necessarily always lead you to something really productive in terms of your goals. But again, being really honest to say, this is amazing, we'd love for you to kind of take that and run with it. It's not something the charity can necessarily do, but we recognize its value. Even just saying that is important. But it can be difficult. And not getting frustrated, I think, and having that longer term vision of we're investing this time to really see those long-term results coming out of it is something you need to cling to. You really have to keep sight of, otherwise it can be, I think, tempting to say, well, not all our ambassadors are top, A-grade volunteers. Why are we doing this? I think you need to remember why you're doing it in the first place.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, because it's not all going to be plain sailing, and you can't possibly plan for every challenge that's going to come around. But just having that, this is why we're doing it, this is where we're trying to get to, can definitely help.
Yeah.
So how long have you been running an ambassador program?
Oh gosh, I mean, almost since I joined the charity, which is coming up to 2 years. So it is not a fully mature program at this point by any sort of measure, but we have kind of jumped the first hurdle, which is launching it, engaging with our initial volunteers, and also kind of seeing our first successes from the program. It's interesting because we continually face challenges in the ambassadors program as a result of that growth, and I think the next stages will be just as challenging as the initial ones. But it really has come on a long way since it was us and just a handful of people sitting in a room saying, how are we going to build this? What should it look like? Yeah.
So with so you've been doing it for 2 years. You said it's important to maintain a vision of where you're trying to go to. Did you have any kind of time frame of what that vision looked like at the beginning? Because quite often, it's like, do we look for 5 years in the future, or a vision for the next year? Did you have?
I think it's probably one of the areas where we were a little weaker, actually, to be candid with you, is we had metrics associated with the program, but we really didn't think too critically about, what outcomes do we really need to see in what time frame. We, would roughly assess it every sort of 6 months or so to say how we're going. I think it's only now that we've started to see really quite substantial successes coming from the program that we've begun wanting to put a sort of a tighter rein on it and say, where is this going? Direct our energies. What is the framework around ambassadors? How does that really work? And I would say, if you want to do it better than we did, one thing I'd really advise you to do is be a bit tighter on that. Say, how many ambassadors do we want by this point in time? What do we want them to be doing? What sorts of results and outcomes would we really like to see to justify success? I think an advantage of doing that, of course, is if you are trying to sell this internally and get more resource for it, you're giving yourself the best possible chance of success by measuring it. It's an interesting question, because I think it's an area where we probably stumbled a little bit. And I would suspect that charities, do that fairly regularly when, you're small, when you have this kind of bright idea. You just want to get it going. But taking that step back to kind of say, what is it really for, what's it going to do, what does success look like, I think is going to speed up your transition to a fully fledged program. Yeah.
So let's talk about some of your successes.
Sure.
The impact. What impact has this had on MQ?
I mean, we've seen some really incredible stuff. We've had ambassadors contribute to a number of 4-figure and 5-figure gifts. The value associated with the program, we'd say, is probably in the 6 figures now. And that's a relatively small number of ambassadors doing that. There's that stuff which is very easy to measure and kind of looks good on our board reports and stuff like that. But then there's also a lot of stuff which goes on below the line. We hear a lot from people who get in touch with us. They said, oh, well, one of your ambassadors came and spoke at my event, or, met me at work or something like that, and just had glowing things to say about you. And from that, you then have a new relationship that you can work with a company, with high net worth individuals, whatever it might be. I think the other thing it's really done is it's kept us true to our sort of principle of co-creation and working with our community rather than sort of separate to it. So having ambassadors weigh in on our campaign, having them voice their opinions, having them feedback on major campaigning initiatives is such a big thing for us as a new charity. It can be so easy to be a bit myopic and a bit blinkered and kind of lose that broader picture when your head's down just trying to, really get what you need to get done. And ambassadors are really good at, I think, pulling you back from that and just saying, well, this is kind of how it seems to us as part of your community. So all in all, for us, it's been a hugely valuable program. Our challenge now is really how we direct it, how we grow it and how we scale it, I think.
It's amazing how that listening piece can be so easy to forget. Like you said, when you're
busy,
when your head's down, and you have people there that want to help, and they're your audience. They're the ones we should be testing, as you say, co-creating.
No, absolutely. And if you find yourself, I think, in a situation where you have no time to really be attentive to, especially your highest value ambassadors, the ones who are really pulling for you and really, achieving things, then it's time to think about, scaling back. It's time to think about, or maybe not even scaling back, refocusing, refining how your program works, because that sort of relationship, that essential connection is so important to really motivating people to push higher. The ambassadors who have really made meaningful contributions to MQ are people that are very close to what we do, and they have relationships with multiple members of the team. We meet with them fairly regularly. The moment you begin losing that is the moment that those people are losing the motivation to really, because why would they? You're losing that essential spark. So it's difficult, never claim that it's easy to maintain that, especially in busy times, but it's something to keep an eye on, have a sense of, are we delivering that to our volunteers? Do they have that feeling from us? If I was an ambassador, how would I feel right now? I think it's so important to really keep yourselves on track. Yeah.
Thank you. So, what does the future look like? You've clearly seen some success with it. You've had some challenges. It's not all been plain sailing. But if I said, John, here's a magic genie, you've got 3 wishes. What does that look like?
Oh boy.
Next year, maybe 2 years, 5 years.
So I think for us, we've sort of touched on some of these things. It's really about refining and refocusing. We're now at a point where the number of ambassadors is beginning to grow quite rapidly. We've had a lot being generated by our campaign, and more people getting in touch than ever before. And it's really what are our systems of staying in touch with these people? What can we do to get beyond sort of spreadsheets and that sort of thing? Looking at digital solutions to help scale our communication. And again, just really planning on what success should look like. Where are you allocating your time? I think is a big challenge for us. To make sure that those really vital ambassadors who really turn the wheel for the charity, we don't lose that connection, however big the program gets. And if that means that we have a number of ambassadors going onto a more general program of communication, that might be a trade-off the charity has to make. It's as with many things in a small charity, it's scaling it, it's making it bigger, it's making it better all the time. Never easy.
So for anybody watching today, say they haven't started their ambassador program yet, you've given some really good tips, but if there was just one piece of advice that you could give that they should concentrate on if they really want to get this off the ground, what would that be?
Yeah, so the one thing I would say, and I think we did this fairly well, is really collaborate with your early ambassadors and volunteers, so your nucleus group on what the program should be. And not just with them, with staff and with your board as well. Really take the time to draft out what the ambassadors program or your volunteer program, whatever you call it, should do. And take that to volunteers and just say, how does this feel? Does it feel good? Is it something you'd want to do? Or does it sound utterly rubbish? We completely miss the point here. The big hazard is you spend a lot of time, drafting your terms of reference and setting up these systems, and then your ambassadors are like, taking that time at the beginning to really get everyone on board with what the mission is, how it's going to work, who's going to be looking after it, who's holding those relationships is so important to save you pain further down the road. And it also makes sure that, if your initial group of ambassadors like it, odds are when you scale it up that your wider group of ambassadors is going to like it too. But it's a process that doesn't end at the beginning. It's something that you really have to keep doing, and saying, well, what do you think? How do you feel? Does this, doesn't this? But doing that as you kick off, I think, is the best possible first step you can make.
Okay, brilliant. You mentioned about kind of using your ambassadors to get other ambassadors on board. Now, when we talk to people where we kind of call those initial people the innovators and early adopters, and to get them across the chasm, as it were, to the next group, that often they need the social proof, and they need to hear from the original people that were involved. So have you seen that? Have you seen that when you've asked your ambassadors to recruit other ambassadors, it's been successful, and how's that worked?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, ambassadors are very much invested in what you do, so they do have skin in the game in that sense. But at the same time, they're not working for the charity directly, And a lot of time there are people who are, they're professionals in some other sphere, they're busy, Their take on MQ is usually brutally honest, actually, because they have no reason to do anything else. And so I think it's really valuable to have that authenticity. If someone says, look, here are some things they do well, here are some things they maybe don't do so well, but overall this is what the program is meant to be. Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. I suppose the other element to it too is having your ambassadors networked with each other is massively valuable, because it begins to decentralize a little bit, and lets them work as almost little subcommittees. I think it can be quite a lonely thing if you're an external volunteer for a charity and you're out the office, you maybe don't see people that often. Having a bit of a support group around you, even if that's just one or two other ambassadors, I think is a hugely valuable thing that, is often forgotten. You think of charity in the middle and spokes sort of volunteers running off it. But really you want little networks operating, semi-independently where you possibly can. And over time, I think you see greater results from that, because, of course, groups of people working together is always more effective. Yeah.
And how much do you kind of try and facilitate those subcommittees and support groups, or do you just kind of let it naturally and organically grow?
So we're just at the beginning of this journey, actually, and it'll be interesting to chat about this in let's say, a year or 2 years. As a small charity, we haven't tackled, for example, regional groups or like ambassador special interest groups yet, but we really want to, because it seems to me that as a small charity, again, trying to think about how you work more cleverly, the answer is always, well, how can we empower other people to even, do it themselves? So, yeah, watch this space on that one. I think it's going to be really, really important for us.
Okay, brilliant. Well, that's all of the questions I have planned. We're going to move over to some of the questions from the audience. I believe we do have some in already. If you haven't put one in yet, but do have a burning question, do enter it now, and we'll hopefully get to it. Any that we don't get to during this webinar, we'll follow up with, and we'll get some answers shipped out to them. Cool. So the first question we have is, how does your organisation feel about the fact that they're going to be ambassadors representing your brand, and you don't necessarily have full control over what they're saying?
Slightly nervous, but confident, because what we've seen are ambassadors who are incredible speakers, very respectful of the brand and the organisation, who take it very seriously, the question of how the charity is perceived. I think it's one that, especially as you begin, there will be a degree of unease, and you may have some trouble selling this internally. Can we trust these people that we maybe don't know as well with our brand? I think, again, you have to give yourself the best possible chance of success. With those speakers, maybe those are people that need some more time. They need to be in the office. They need to be sort of fully briefed and really get a feel for how the organisation speaks about itself. And over time, what you see, and what we've certainly seen, is a number of ambassadors who've really shone in that area. So, people that can speak as well as any staff member could, and also bring a degree of, again, that authenticity, because, they're not employed by the charity. They don't have to be there. They could be anywhere else, and they've chosen to do it because it really sings to them. So it's a difficult one, and, there's an element of risk, and you can't control everything. But I think it's worth it, certainly, and we've seen pretty incredible results from doing it.
That's reassuring to know, yeah. Brilliant. Okay, this is a really good question, actually. What does your stewardship program look like? Thank yous, ambassador comms. We always talk about donor stewardship, but how's that ambassador stewardship?
So again, it's something that you can always do better. And what we've really tried to do is engage our ambassadors personally as much as we can. So, we hold fairly regular events at our office where we just get our ambassadors in, with no real strict agenda of what they're going to be hearing about, but to meet staff. Again, I think, being an out-of-office volunteer can be a little bit lonely, and any opportunity we have to build a sense of community around them is so important. And standard recognition things, around getting them in your annual review and making sure they're invited to all the events that they should be invited to. It's any opportunity you can. For us, I think the most valuable thing to ambassadors is, again, that personal relationship. Is that sense that, look, I'm not just a volunteer at this charity, but I'm a really critical part of its vanguard, and, I make things happen as a result of my role, and feeding that back to ambassadors, to say, thank you so much, and this was absolutely fantastic. Here's the feedback we got from the venue about your speech and stuff like that. Little personal touch points whenever you possibly can, along that kind of relationship fundraising model really just seem to mean kind of the world of difference to ambassadors, yeah.
Cool, we've got some more questions here. One of them says, with regards to your ambassadors doing talks and public speaking about your cause, how much training do you provide to them, and resources as well? And is there any quality control feedback around those talks?
So again, as a young charity, we've taken a bit of a leap of faith with it, I'd say, where we always ask for feedback after a speaking event to see how that ambassador done, but to some extent it's slightly unknowable. Because we weren't there, because we're hearing it from the ambassador themselves and the venue. I think the training point is where you do have that control, and what I would always seek to do with an ambassador who was going to speak somewhere is to sit down physically with them, to talk about what they're going to say, and hopefully to run through it. To talk about fielding questions is really important, because a lot of ambassadors are very comfortable going and speaking in front of people, but the real difficulty for them as, someone who doesn't work for your organization is, what if someone just comes and asks them a question, about a research program or a service you offer or something like that. And, learning how to deal with those questions, when it's better just to say, oh, I'm not sure, I'll put you in touch with the charity, I think is really, really important. And we try and do that as much as we can. Now, the nice thing about having an ambassador program is, over time, those individuals get better and better at what they do, and you're not having to train them each time, actually. They're gathering that experience, and you begin to build up a bit of a speakers bureau. I think it's again, when you set out to start a program like this, you might need to ask yourself, well, how much time would I actually have to sit down in the office and spend an hour with each speaker? And that might inform your recruitment efforts, to sort of tailor them appropriately. I think you really have to look at, how the organization works and how much time you can afford to spend on it. But training is always a good thing, and what you hope is that it really pays dividends, and certainly we've seen that it has.
Yeah, so they invest in them, and it pays off.
Certainly.
Absolutely makes sense. Cool. We have some more coming in. If you haven't put your question in yet, do get it in, and we'll hopefully get to it. So Owen has asked, what type of volunteer opportunities do you offer, and are there any that are in particular high level? So, for example, host an event, which you just mentioned.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, and this I think is something that begins to emerge once your program grows a little. Is that clearly the opportunities for one type of volunteer and another should be quite different, because those are individuals making quite different contributions. We've started looking at really kind of breaking up our volunteering world, so that we have our ambassadors program, but then we also have high-level networks as well. So places that individuals of a sort of particularly let's say elevated contribution have a place to sit that feels right for them, where they're among their peers, that sort of recognizes what they do. It's something that always has to evolve, though, and I think a really, good thing again is to consult with your ambassadors on this. To say, look, just be really transparent. We want you to feel valuable because you are valuable, and we want to communicate that to you. What are the sorts of things you'd really want to get? Where would you like to be? Would you like to meet with the researchers or the staff, or what would that look like? And you'll have some ambassadors who will say all of the above. Can you do it all? And obviously you can't, but having it be a collaborative discussion rather than something that's sort of thrust on your volunteers always seems to be better, I think. Yeah.
And last question here. So if you do offer a lot of volunteer and ambassador opportunities for your individuals and community, how do you manage in terms of like a one-to-one tailoring asks of them versus you could do a number of different things? I think that's what they're getting at. So, so saying, you could help in these 5 ways versus we'd like you to help in this way because of who you are.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I think you have to do a bit of both. You have to have sort of heartbeat communications going out so ambassadors know that the program's alive and that there are options to participate. And again, that's a good kind of push for them to think creatively about other ways they might want to be involved. But yeah, I mean, don't be afraid to just have conversations with your ambassadors about this. If something comes up and you're like, God, such and such would be amazing for this, to just drop them an email and say, hey, look, there's an opportunity. And in that way, I think you step outside it just being a program and you are kind of more in that relationship space, if that makes sense. And oftentimes I think for that ambassador, that's a really touching, special part of their relationship with you is the fact that you've been sitting there and just thought that one person can really make this, work really well. Yeah, not being afraid to kind of step outside your comms and your emails and your updates and stuff like that to just reach out to someone if you know them. And of course you won't if you haven't spent the time getting to know them in the first place, so it's impossible to do. Yeah, I think it's, and again, the question of time comes into this. How much can you really be spending asking, one ambassador if they're available for something as opposed to kind of sending it out to the whole group. So it's just, it's a bit of a common sense thing, do you have the time to look at it individually, or is it something that maybe sits better as a group communication? These are just the assessments I think you constantly have to make and will evolve as you grow your program and it develops and changes.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone listening who sent in a question. I'm sorry if we haven't had time to answer that, but we will follow up with those after the webinar, so do leave them. John, thank you very much for joining us today. Every time we've spoken, I think I've learned something new and used it, so hopefully everyone today has found that as useful as I have. For everyone listening, that sadly is the end of our 2017 webinar program, but we will be back in the new year, so please do tell us what you found useful, what we can improve on, and what you'd like to see